I met my fiance 8 years ago while we were both going through divorces. Initially, our relationship was wonderful, but serious issues have surfaced over time, particularly regarding how he handles emotions and expectations. For his 50th birthday, I failed to organize the big party he wanted. He became furious, yelling, calling me names, and even throwing things. 3 days later, he surprisingly proposed, explaining that his frustration stemmed from not being able to propose during the party. I said yes, but felt deeply conflicted. While planning the wedding, we clashed constantly, and the plans ultimately fell apart. Around the same time, he discussed a trip to Italy with his mother and brother, but never made firm plans. Later, my aunt, who helped raise me, invited me on a trip to Italy, offering to pay for everything. I agreed, but when my fiance found out, he erupted again, accusing me of selfishness and prioritizing my family over him. He demanded we marry before the trip as a way for me to make up for my mistakes. I reluctantly agreed, but the wedding plans stalled, leading to even more heated arguments. While our day-to-day life is often pleasant, his frequent outbursts over feeling hurt or disappointed are overwhelming. I love the life we've built and don't want to start over, but his anger and demands are draining me. I'm unsure how to reconcile my love for him with the pain he causes me.
Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring a personal story that you sent in, and it really got me thinking about the complexities of relationships.
Oh, absolutely.
On the surface, it seems like a love story. You met your fiance 8 years ago, both fresh out of divorces. You connected instantly, things moved quickly.
Right.
But there's another side to the story, a pattern of explosive anger that seems to erupt whenever your fiance's expectations aren't met. So,
Yeah, starting a relationship during a time of personal upheaval, like a divorce, can be a double-edged sword. While that shared vulnerability can create a really powerful bond, it also brings the risk of unresolved baggage.
mm.
Makes me wonder if some of those past hurts are influencing the dynamics that you're experiencing now.
Let's fast forward to the present. Your fiance's 50th birthday was approaching. A milestone he'd been anticipating, especially after feeling let down by his 40th birthday experience, and you wanted to make it special, pulling out all the stops for a big celebration. But as the date got closer, the plans started to unravel.
Hmm. This situation with high expectations colliding with reality is ripe for conflict. It sounds like his past disappointment around birthdays created a sensitivity, making this celebration even more loaded.
And that sensitivity turned into an explosive reaction when the birthday plans didn't pan out. The anger, the yelling, the name-calling, it's concerning to hear about this level of emotional volatility.
This behavior raises some red flags. The fact that he demanded an apology before even speaking to you again suggests a need for control and dominance within the relationship. He's dictating the terms of reconciliation instead of engaging in healthy communication.
And this is where the story takes a heartbreaking turn. The stress of the situation impacted your health and you landed in urgent care with an infection. And instead of offering support, your fiance blamed you for his outburst, saying you hurt him so badly.
That blame shifting is a concerning defense mechanism. Instead of taking responsibility for his actions, he's projecting his own feelings of guilt and discomfort onto you. This pattern of deflecting blame can really erode the foundation of trust in a relationship.
3 days after this explosive fight, something unexpected happened, he proposed. He explained that he'd planned to propose at the birthday party.
The timing of this proposal, coming right after a major conflict, raises questions about his motivations. It feels like a manipulative tactic, using a grand gesture to smooth over the hurt that he caused and potentially guilt you into accepting.
You mentioned feeling conflicted about accepting the proposal. While you would have been thrilled under different circumstances, his behavior left you feeling deeply uneasy.
Right. It's crucial to assess the overall health and dynamics of a relationship, especially when faced with such a life-altering decision. A proposal shouldn't be used to mask or dismiss deeper issues.
Unfortunately, the problems didn't disappear with the ring. Wedding planning became a battleground with disagreements over every detail. It seems like any deviation from his expectations triggered that familiar pattern of anger and blame.
This recurring conflict reinforces the pattern that we've been discussing. It's as if he's trying to maintain control by dictating the terms of your shared experiences. This need to control every aspect of the wedding could be a sign of deeper insecurities or a fear of things not going according to his plan.
And then comes the Italy trip. Your aunt, who played a significant role in raising you, offered an incredible opportunity. A trip to Italy, all expenses paid. It sounds like a dream come true, a chance to create lasting memories.
This trip represents a genuine and meaningful connection for you, a chance to honor the bond you share with your aunt. It's about celebrating life and creating shared experiences.
But when you shared this news with your fiance, his reaction was far from supportive. He accused you of prioritizing your aunt over him, of failing him again after the birthday debacle.
This reaction, filled with accusations and a sense of abandonment, speaks volumes about the power dynamic in your relationship. It's not about the trip itself, it's about his perceived loss of control and the threat to his idealized vision.
His anger escalated, culminating in a shocking ultimatum. You had to marry him before going on the trip.
This ultimatum is a classic example of controlling behavior. He's using the wedding as leverage to dictate your actions and restrict your independence.
You reluctantly agreed to the ultimatum, but months passed with no progress on wedding plans. It seems like his demand for marriage was more about exerting control than a genuine desire to commit.
The inconsistency between his words and actions further highlights the manipulative nature of this situation. He demands marriage as a condition for the trip, yet makes no effort to move forward with the actual commitment.
Yeah.
This creates a confusing and emotionally draining dynamic for you.
You decided to focus on your upcoming trip with your aunt, a decision that reignited the arguments. He accused you of neglecting him, of failing to meet his needs, even though you were about to embark on a once-in-a-lifetime journey with your elderly aunt.
This constant negativity takes a toll. You're walking on eggshells trying to avoid triggering his anger, creating a deeply unhealthy dynamic where you're constantly trying to manage his emotions instead of focusing on your own needs.
And it's not like your entire relationship is bad. You describe your daily life outside of these blow-ups as quite good. He's generous, helpful, and you enjoy shared activities. But that underlying tension, that fear of triggering another outburst, is eroding your connection.
This is a common experience in relationships with an imbalance of power. Moments of genuine connection and affection can be overshadowed by fear and tension created by unpredictable outbursts. This constant state of alert can be incredibly draining, leaving you feeling emotionally exhausted.
You also mentioned being aware of your own communication shortcomings and that you might be neurodivergent. You wonder if that contributes to the difficulties in understanding each other's perspectives.
It's commendable that you're self-aware, but remember, your communication style or potential neurodivergence doesn't excuse his behavior. No one deserves to be subjected to verbal abuse or manipulation, regardless of their individual challenges.
This brings us to the heart of the dilemma. You love the life you've built together, but his extreme reactions to your perceived mistakes make life unbearable. It's a constant push and pull between wanting to preserve the good parts of the relationship and struggling with the emotional toll of his anger.
It's a difficult situation, and it's understandable that you're feeling torn. You're trying to balance your love for him with the need to protect your own emotional well-being. This internal conflict is something many people face when trying to navigate complex relationships.
That's a great place to pause for now. We'll continue unpacking this story in part 2, exploring the challenges of balancing love and self-preservation.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? Trying to support a partner while also protecting yourself.
It really is. And it's easy to just say, just leave, but relationships rarely unravel that quickly. Especially when love history and a shared life are involved. You clearly care deeply for your fiancé and you want to make things work.
You mentioned several examples of your dedication to the relationship. Taking care of the house, cooking, doing all the chores. You even took on a mortgage so you could buy a home together when his credit wasn't great. These are significant contributions, and they demonstrate your commitment and willingness to support him. But it also raises a concern. Is this a truly balanced partnership?
Is he reciprocating that level of care and consideration? That is the million-dollar question. We're only hearing your side of the story. But from what you've shared, there seems to be a real imbalance. You're putting in so much effort to keep things running smoothly and avoid conflict, while he seems stuck in this cycle of anger and resentment.
This pattern of one partner overfunctioning, almost becoming a caretaker to avoid conflict, is common in imbalanced relationships. Sadly, it often leads to resentment on both sides.
It's as if you're constantly on edge trying to anticipate his reactions. It's no way to live. And it makes me think about our listeners. I bet many can relate to this dynamic on some level. Maybe they've experienced something similar in their own relationships, or they know someone who has.
Unfortunately, this type of dynamic rooted in insecurity control issues or difficulty regulating emotions plays out far too often. Recognizing these patterns is the first step toward breaking free.
It's so important to acknowledge that relationships aren't always perfect. It can be difficult to admit that something isn't working, especially when you love the person and you want to make things work.
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
sometimes that desire to make things work can keep us in unhealthy patterns much longer than we should.
So, what can you do when you find yourself in this type of situation? Where do you even begin to unravel these ingrained patterns?
The first step is acknowledging that there's a problem, that the current dynamic isn't sustainable. That can be incredibly difficult, especially when you're afraid of the consequences.
You mean afraid of triggering another outburst? Afraid of your partner's anger?
Yes, but it's crucial to remember that you deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of any mistakes you make or challenges you might have.
So, let's say you're ready to make a change. What comes next?
Open and honest communication is essential, but it needs to happen in a safe and constructive way. Sometimes this involves seeking professional help, either individually or as a couple. A therapist can provide a neutral space to explore deeper issues and develop healthier communication skills.
That makes sense. But what if your partner is unwilling to go to therapy or even admit there's a problem?
That's a tough situation and sadly not uncommon. If your partner resists change, you need to focus on what you can control, your own well-being.
So, things like setting boundaries and prioritizing self care.
Exactly. It's about understanding your needs and limits and communicating them clearly and assertively.
And sometimes setting those boundaries might mean walking away from the relationship, right? Even if you love the person.
Yes, love doesn't conquer all. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to prioritize your safety and emotional health.
That's a powerful message. It brings us back to your story. You're at a crossroads. This incredible opportunity to travel with your aunt has reignited those deep-seated conflicts with your fiancé.
External circumstances often bring internal struggles to the surface. The trip isn't the problem. It's acting as a catalyst for you to confront larger issues in the relationship.
It's forcing you to ask some difficult questions. Can you continue living with this level of volatility and control? Is it possible for him to change? And most importantly, what do you need to feel safe, loved, and respected?
Those are exactly the questions you need to grapple with as you move forward. You've shown incredible courage by sharing your story. It takes so much strength to be this vulnerable, to open up about such a personal and painful experience.
Your willingness to share speaks to the power of storytelling. It creates space for these difficult conversations. We all have our relationship baggage, our struggles with communication. Hearing someone else's story helps us feel less alone and empowers us to make positive changes in our own lives. And you know, it's so true. Hearing other people's stories can help us feel seen and understood. And as we move into the final part of this deep dive, there's one thing that really stuck with me. It seems like your fiancé fixates on these milestone events, his 40th birthday, the upcoming 50th, even the trip to Italy.
Yeah,
When things don't go exactly according to plan, he erupts.
that's a keen observation. It seems these events tap into a deeper need for control and validation. Perhaps he feels like these milestones are a chance to rewrite the past to make up for perceived disappointments or slights.
Right.
And when reality doesn't match his idealized vision,
Yeah.
it triggers intense feelings of anger and resentment.
It's like he's so focused on creating these perfect moments that he misses out on the actual experience, the messiness and imperfections that make life real.
Exactly. The irony is that the more we try to control and orchestrate our lives, the more likely we are to miss out on the spontaneous joy and connection that come from embracing the present moment.
That's such a powerful thought. We all have expectations and attachments, our own ways of trying to manage life's uncertainties. How do we find that balance between honoring our needs and desires while also allowing for flexibility? How do we navigate those inevitable disappointments without letting them derail our relationships?
It starts with open and honest communication, being able to express our feelings and needs in a safe and respectful way. It also involves developing healthy coping mechanisms for dealing with stress and frustration. Learning to regulate our own emotions is crucial, especially when things don't go as planned.
And maybe letting go of the need to control every little detail.
Precisely. Embracing the unknown, allowing for spontaneity, and finding joy in those unexpected detours life throws our way.
I love that. That beautifully summarizes the essence of our deep dive today. We've explored the complexities of this relationship at a crossroads, unpacking the dynamics of anger control and the yearning for validation. But it's also a story about the human journey, the ongoing process of learning, growing, and finding our way back to ourselves.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even amidst challenges, there's always hope for healing, understanding, and creating relationships built on mutual respect, love, and acceptance of life's imperfections.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought. If you're feeling stuck in a similar situation, struggling with questions of love, self-preservation, and the desire for a healthier relationship, please know you're not alone. Reach out, seek support, and remember that you deserve to be treated with kindness, respect, and compassion, both by yourself and those you love.
Beautifully said. The journey toward healthier relationships is a process, not a destination. Be patient with yourself, celebrate the small victories, and never underestimate the power of love, forgiveness, and the courage to create positive change.
Such great advice. Thank you so much for joining me on another deep dive. And to all of you listening, thank you for being here, for sharing your stories, and for being part of this incredible community. We'll see you next time.
5 years ago, the narrator had a 6-month emotional affair that her husband recently discovered. She reflects on whether betrayal has levels, depending on its type, emotional versus physical, context, and circumstances. She regrets lying when confronted, which worsened her husband's pain, and she empathizes with how devastating betrayal can feel. She also questions whether emotional abuse, like yelling at a vulnerable partner, is as harmful as betrayal. She concludes that betrayal and other hurts should be judged with nuance, as the details and context significantly affect their impact.
All right, so welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be talking about betrayal.
Ooh, that's a juicy one.
Yeah, it is, and we're going to be specifically looking at whether there are, like, quote-unquote, levels to it.
Levels to betrayal.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm interested.
Yeah, so this whole thing is inspired by this one woman's account. It's a very personal account of infidelity in her own marriage.
Wow. Okay.
And before we kind of jump into the nitty-gritty, I do just want to say that this is obviously a very sensitive topic.
For sure?
And the goal here is not to, like, judge anyone,
No, absolutely not.
but rather to just, like, try to understand the different perspectives that are presented in the source material.
Yeah, just kind of see where she's coming from and how she's thinking about this.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, so in this woman's account, she reveals that she had a 6-month emotional affair
Okay.
5 years ago, and her husband, he just recently found out about it. So yeah, it's pretty heavy stuff, and she's clearly, like, struggling with a lot of guilt, but she's also kind of questioning the societal norms around how we, like, define betrayal.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would come up.
Yeah, and, like, one of the first things she asks is, like, aren't there levels to betrayal?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Right.
Yeah, it is. And I think it speaks to that human need to, like, categorize things, right?
Yeah.
To try to make sense of difficult experiences.
Totally, yeah.
And what's interesting to me is how she uses this question to then explore, like, whether certain types of betrayal are more or less forgivable than others.
Exactly. Yeah, and she gets really specific about the factors that she believes come into play. She distinguishes between emotional and physical infidelity.
Right, the classic debate.
I know, right? Like, which one is worse? Is one inherently worse than the other?
It's a tough one.
Yeah, is it, like, the act itself, or is it the emotional intent behind it that really constitutes betrayal?
Yeah.
It's hard to say.
Totally.
And then she also brings up the duration and the frequency
Right, right.
of the betrayal. So, like, a one-time lapse in judgment, that might feel very different from, like, a sustained pattern of deception.
For sure. Like, was it just a slip up, or is this something that was, like, ongoing and intentional?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like she's urging us to consider the full context of the situation.
Yeah, to look beyond just the act itself and really understand all the nuances involved.
Totally. And then she also throws out this question. She asks, would it matter if my husband had a one-night stand during a time when I was, like, emotionally distant? Would it somehow be less hurtful because I wasn't meeting his needs?
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
I know, right?
Yeah, it is.
It's a tough one, and it really got me thinking, like, is she trying to, like, shift blame here? Or is there a legitimate point here about how, like, relationship dynamics can contribute to vulnerability?
It's a tricky area to navigate, for sure, but I think she's tapping into something really important here, which is, this idea of attachment styles.
Oh, interesting.
The way we respond to betrayal is often influenced by, like, our early childhood experiences and the ways we learn to connect with others. So, for example, someone with an anxious attachment style, they might be more sensitive to any perceived threats
Right.
to the relationship, which could lead to like heightened feelings of betrayal, even in situations that, others might consider less severe.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and she even brings up the relationship to the other person involved
Okay.
in the betrayal. So she feels particularly guilty in this case because her affair was with a married man.
Oh, wow.
So it's like it's adding another layer of like wrongness to the whole situation.
Yeah, the ripple effects are even bigger in that case.
Exactly. It's like she's acknowledging that her choices didn't just impact her husband, but like also another family.
Yeah, it becomes a much more complicated web of relationships.
Totally. Yeah. And then she wonders if the impact would be different if the marriage was already kind of on shaky ground
Okay. Interesting.
versus being like seemingly happy.
So is it less of a betrayal if the relationship was already strained?
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
That's a tough one.
Yeah. And it kind of brings up this idea of how we tend to view betrayal through like the lens of our own experiences, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Our individual expectations and what we consider to be like acceptable or unacceptable behavior in a relationship.
Totally. And then she makes this really interesting comparison. She compares betrayal to her husband's yelling,
Oh, okay.
which she considers a form of emotional abuse.
Okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah, she even points out that like he's never cheated on her.
Right.
So like does that automatically make him the quote unquote better person?
Hmm. This is where things get really nuanced, I think, because while it's obviously important to acknowledge that any form of abuse is damaging and unacceptable,
Yeah.
I think it's also crucial to understand that, like, the differences between them.
Okay, yeah.
So infidelity often involves this deliberate act of, like, deception
Right.
and a violation of, agreed upon boundaries.
Hmm.
Whereas emotional abuse, that can manifest in much more subtle and even insidious ways,
Right.
sometimes even unintentionally.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's not always this like cut and dry black and white situation.
So what you're saying is that like while both can be deeply hurtful,
Mhm.
they stem from different motivations and they have different impacts on the relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful.
Then while, this woman in the story, she seems to be using the comparison to kind of justify her own actions.
Right.
It's crucial that we don't fall into the trap of like minimizing or excusing any form of abuse.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's not about creating like a hierarchy of pain,
Right.
saying that one person's hurt is more valid than another's.
Exactly.
It's about recognizing that like complex interplay of emotions, intentions, and individual vulnerabilities,
Yes, exactly.
within a relationship.
Yeah,
And I think that's what makes this woman's account so fascinating, right?
totally.
Like she's not just sharing her story.
Right.
She's forcing us to confront some like really uncomfortable questions
Yes.
about how we define and how we judge betrayal.
Yeah. And I think that's a valuable exercise, even if it does leave us with, more questions than answers.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So before we move on and kind of explore the psychology of betrayal a little bit deeper
Yeah.
and the complexities of relationship dynamics, I want to just pause for a second and ask you, the listener, a question.
Okay.
What stands out to you so far in this woman's story?
Yeah. What resonates with you?
What resonates with your own experiences or your understanding of this, this complex topic?
Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, let's know.
It's interesting how she brings up this idea of emotional abuse alongside infidelity.
Right.
Like, how do we even measure different types of harm in a relationship?
Yeah.
Can we really say that one is worse than the other?
Yeah, that's a really tough question.
It is.
And I appreciate that she's even bringing it to light.
Yeah.
It's like she's saying that just because her betrayal was like more visible,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't mean that it was the only or
Yeah.
even the most damaging hurt in their relationship.
Exactly. And this is where I think understanding the psychology of betrayal can be so helpful.
Okay.
Because while, infidelity is often seen as this like ultimate betrayal,
Right.
any action that really shatters that foundation of trust in a relationship can be deeply wounding.
Yeah, totally. So how do we even begin to untangle all of these different types of hurt? Like, is it even possible to compare them in a fair way?
Well, I think I think the key here is recognizing that we can't create like some sort of universal pain scale.
Right.
You know, what might feel devastating to one person could be perceived very differently by someone else.
Totally.
And it all comes down to, those individual experiences and vulnerabilities. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, those attachment styles.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, like, for example, someone who has experienced gaslighting in the past, which is like, a form of emotional abuse where someone is manipulating you into doubting your own sanity.
Right.
They might be hyper aware of any signs of manipulation in their current relationship.
Exactly. Yeah. And for them, experiencing even like subtle forms of emotional abuse, again, could be incredibly triggering.
Right.
And bring up a lot of past trauma.
Yeah.
It's not about saying that one type of pain is worse than another.
Right.
But understanding that the impact is deeply personal and shaped by this like complex web of individual factors.
Okay. So it sounds like while acknowledging those nuances of betrayal is important, it doesn't diminish the pain of the person who feels betrayed.
Exactly. And I think it's crucial to remember here that the woman in this account, she acknowledges her husband's pain.
Right.
She's not trying to excuse her actions or downplay the impact of her infidelity.
Right.
She's simply asking us to consider the possibility of a more nuanced perspective
Yeah.
on a very complex issue.
It's a brave thing to do.
It is.
To put yourself out there like that.
Yeah.
Especially when you're facing the consequences of your actions.
Yeah.
I think it highlights how quick we are to judge in these situations
Right.
without truly understanding the full context.
Absolutely. It's human nature to want to like categorize things as good or bad, right or wrong.
Yeah.
But relationships are messy.
They are.
And they rarely fit into like neat boxes,
Yeah.
We often project our own values and experiences onto others, assuming that their reactions should align with our own.
Yeah, and that's why communication is so vital.
Yep.
If we can create a space for open and honest dialogue where both partners feel safe to express their feelings and their needs without fear of judgment, that's where I think true understanding can begin.
It's about approaching these situations with empathy and a willingness to listen. It's not about condoning hurtful behavior, but recognizing the complexity of human relationships and the many factors that contribute to both the highs and the lows.
I think this woman's story ultimately highlights that while betrayal can be incredibly painful, it can also be a catalyst for growth.
Yeah.
Both within ourselves and in our relationships.
It's a powerful reminder that even in those darkest moments, there's always the potential for healing and transformation.
Totally.
But it requires a commitment to honesty, to compassion, and a willingness to embrace, the messiness of being human.
So if we were to apply this woman's insights to our own lives, what would that look like? How can we cultivate a more nuanced understanding of betrayal in our own relationships and interaction?
Oh, I think it all starts with self-awareness, taking the time to really reflect on our own values and experiences.
Right.
And those things that trigger us, What are those non-negotiables in our relationships?
Yeah.
How do we typically respond to conflict?
Right.
Or when someone hurts us? And perhaps most importantly, are we willing to be honest with ourselves about our own capacity for both giving and receiving forgiveness?
Yeah, those are some really tough questions.
They are.
But essential ones if we want to build like healthy and resilient relationships.
Absolutely.
Because let's face it, betrayal in some form or another is almost inevitable in any close relationship.
Yeah, we're all human.
Right.
We make mistakes. The key is how we choose to respond to those mistakes. Yeah.
Both in ourselves and in others,
Yeah.
Do we react with anger and judgment?
Right.
Or do we approach the situation with curiosity and compassion?
And that brings us back to communication, being able to express our hurt and our disappointment while also being open to hearing the other person's perspective.
Yeah, it's not easy.
Not at all.
But it's essential if we want to move forward in a way that strengthens the bond rather than tears it apart.
Really?
It's about finding that delicate balance between holding someone accountable for their actions.
Right.
But also recognizing their humanity. It's about understanding that forgiveness doesn't mean condoning the behavior,
Yeah.
but rather choosing to let go of that anger and resentment that can be so toxic.
Right. It's not about saying that betrayal is okay
Right.
or that it shouldn't hurt.
Yeah,
It's about recognizing that it's a complex issue with no easy answers,
for sure.
and that the path to healing is often messy and unpredictable. Absolutely. And it's about remembering that we're all capable of both hurting and being hurt.
Right.
We all have the potential to betray and be betrayed.
Yeah.
The key is to approach these experiences with empathy,
Mhm.
with compassion, and a willingness to learn and grow from them.
This has been such an insightful conversation.
It has.
Before we move on to some final thoughts, we want to hear from you. What resonated with you the most today?
Yeah. What insights or questions have emerged for you as we've explored the complexities of betrayal and its impact on relationships?
This deep dive into betrayal has really given us all a lot to think about.
Yeah.
We've explored the gray areas, the challenges of comparing different types of harm, and the crucial role of communication and self-reflection. So,
Yeah.
what are your takeaways so far?
I think, going back to this woman's story, it really underscores that betrayal, while universally painful, can manifest in so many different ways.
Right.
And recognizing those nuances, it isn't about minimizing anyone's experience.
Mhm.
It's about opening the door to a deeper understanding of ourselves,
Yeah.
our partners,
Mm-hmm.
and that intricate dance that is human connection.
I love that phrase, the intricate dance. It really captures the complexity.
It does.
Instead of getting stuck in the blame game,
Right.
we're encouraged to shift our perspective. Maybe instead of asking who's right and who's wrong,
Right.
because we're asking what led us here?
Yeah.
And how do we move forward?
Exactly. It's about fostering a more compassionate
Yeah.
and constructive dialogue, even
Yeah.
when dealing with, incredibly painful emotions.
This woman's story, while deeply personal, it offers such a valuable framework, I think, for navigating the complexities of betrayal in any relationship, really.
Yeah.
Whether it's romantic, familial,
Yeah.
even professional. So what are some of the key insights that we can apply to our own lives?
Well, I think first and foremost, it reminds us that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes work.
Yeah.
It requires honesty, vulnerability, and a commitment to growth from all parties involved.
Yeah.
It also highlights, I think, the importance of setting clear boundaries,
Right.
communicating our needs effectively,
Mm-hmm.
and embracing that sometimes difficult act of forgiveness,
Right.
both for ourselves and for those who have hurt us.
It's so easy to get caught up in that hurt and anger, but
It is.
ultimately forgiveness is about freeing ourselves
Yeah.
from those heavy emotions.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean condoning the action,
Right.
but rather choosing to let go of the resentment that can just poison a relationship.
Absolutely. And I think this conversation has also underscored the importance of understanding our own attachment styles.
Yeah.
Knowing how we tend to react in relationships,
Yeah.
what our triggers are, what our needs are, that can help us navigate challenging situations with more self-awareness and empathy.
Yeah, this has been an incredibly eye-opening journey.
It has.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question.
Ah.
Something to really ponder as you continue to navigate the complexities of your own relationships.
Okay.
So considering what we've learned about attachment styles and the various forms that betrayal can take,
Mm-hmm.
how might understanding your own attachment style help you anticipate potential challenges and build stronger, more resilient connections with the people you care about?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a question worth exploring, maybe even discussing with someone you trust.
I love that.
Because ultimately the path to healthy, fulfilling relationships is paved with self-awareness,
Mm-hmm.
compassion,
Yeah.
and open communication.
I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.
Facing an unusual proposal. Should sexual compatibility be tested before starting a serious relationship? Hi, everyone. I'm seeking some input on a situation I've encountered. I recently went on a first date with someone, and while we seemed to connect well, something he mentioned has left me feeling uncertain. He suggested that on our second date, we should engage in intimacy as a way to test our sexual compatibility before deciding whether to move forward into a serious relationship. He was very open about his reasoning, explaining that he had experienced a sexless marriage in the past, as well as some unfulfilling relationships afterward. For him, ensuring sexual compatibility early on seems to be a priority. While I do appreciate his honesty, I find it a bit surprising, especially because he presents himself as a decent person who says he's genuinely looking for a serious, meaningful relationship. To be fair, I can see where he's coming from. I've had relationships in the past where I wasn't sexually satisfied, which ultimately led to breakups. So, I understand why this might be important to him. At the same time, some of my friends think his proposal is unusual or even inappropriate. I'm physically attracted to him, and I don't doubt that he's sincere, but I'm unsure if this approach aligns with my values or expectations. I'd really like to hear your thoughts on this. Is his perspective reasonable, or does it raise red flags? How would you handle such a situation? But what's really been weighing on me happened recently. I'll admit that I crossed a line. I went through my wife's phone. I know it was wrong, and I'm not proud of it. But what I found has left me reeling. In a text exchange with him, my wife had written, "I told him that if the timing had been right, we'd be together without hesitation." And he responded, "You're right," with a laughing emoji. Seeing those words felt like a punch to the gut. My wife didn't just repeat what I had always tried to dismiss as a throwaway comment from years ago. She doubled down on it and confirmed it to him. I haven't confronted her yet, partly because I don't know how to start that conversation, and partly because I'm afraid of admitting that I looked through her phone. I love my wife, and I don't want to make any rash decisions or blow things out of proportion. But this situation has shaken me deeply. I'm struggling with feelings of betrayal and insecurity, and I don't know how to handle them. Am I overreacting? How should I approach this with her? And how can I process the pain and doubt that have surfaced? I'd really appreciate any advice or insight from those who've faced similar situations, or from anyone who can offer some wisdom. Thank you for listening.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. So this week, we're tackling a dating dilemma.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I love these.
It's juicy, our listener is saying,
Huh.
that she went on this date.
Okay.
And it seemed like a really good date.
First date magic.
Yeah, first date magic, total connection. But
Yeah.
then the guy kind of threw a curveball.
What happened?
He suggested that on the second date, they should get intimate
What?
to see if they're compatible.
Interesting approach.
Right. And to be fair to the guy, he was like really upfront about his reasons.
Okay.
He's coming out of a sexless marriage. He said he's had other relationships that like fizzled out
Yeah.
because the spark wasn't there.
So he's trying to be proactive, I guess.
Trying to avoid those past mistakes.
Makes sense in a way.
But it's definitely like an interesting way to
Yeah.
go about it.
And I think it speaks to this like growing trend of people really trying to prioritize sexual compatibility, which I think on the surface makes sense. You know, we want to have good chemistry with our partners.
And it is something that you've talked about before in terms
Yeah.
of, your own relationships.
Absolutely. I've definitely had relationships end because of
Yeah.
sexual incompatibility, and it's, it's tough.
Yeah, so it is
Yeah.
a valid concern.
For sure. But I think when we talk about compatibility, we need to remember that it's multifaceted, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yes, sexual compatibility is a part of it, but we also have to consider intellectual compatibility.
Right.
Are you connecting on an intellectual level?
Do you like talking to each other?
Exactly. Can you
Yeah.
hold a conversation? Do you find each other interesting?
Yeah.
And then there's emotional compatibility.
That's a big one.
Huge. Can you be vulnerable with each other? Can you share your feelings? Can you support each other through difficult times?
So are you saying that, like this guy,
Yeah.
jumping to this idea of like the physical
Mm.
so quickly
Mm.
is maybe like a way to almost avoid,
It's possible, yeah. I mean, it could be a way to bypass some of that emotional intimacy.
right? Because you're not
Yeah.
getting to know the person.
Exactly. You're not building that foundation of trust. And understand
And
it's...
some of our listeners' friends
Yeah.
are saying, this is a huge red flag.
Yeah, I can see why they would say that. It's definitely something to be cautious about.
Yeah. And how much do you think societal expectations
Ooh, that's a good point. I mean,
play a role in that?
absolutely. We get so many messages about how we're supposed to date, especially as women.
Right.
There's this pressure to, be open to Physical intimacy early
I
on.
don't want to seem too prudish
Right, exactly.
or like uptight, but you have to remember, you get to make your own rules.
Absolutely. You get to decide what feels right for you.
And I think it's interesting to think about, like, if the genders were reversed here,
Ooh, interesting. Okay, I like this.
would we be having a different conversation?
I think so. I think there are definitely different expectations and assumptions based on gender.
So how do you navigate this? As a woman who's being told, let's just jump into bed and see how it goes.
Right. Well, first of all, I would say it's great that he's being honest
Yeah.
about what he wants, but honesty doesn't automatically equal compatibility or respect for your boundaries.
So what would you recommend our listeners say?
You could try something like, I appreciate you being so open about what you're looking for, but for me, I really like to build a connection before getting physical.
Yeah,
So I'm really enjoying getting to know you, and I'd love to see where things go.
that's great because you're acknowledging his feelings.
Exactly. But you're also being clear about your own needs and boundaries.
And if he freaks out, that's probably a sign
Yeah, that could be a red flag.
that he's not the right guy.
Right. It's all about finding someone who respects you and values you.
For all of you.
Exactly. Not just one aspect.
It shouldn't just be about.
The physical.
Right. You deserve a relationship that feels good on all levels, intellectual, emotional, and physical.
So, listener, as you move forward, think about what really matters to you in a relationship.
Yeah. What are your
That's-
non-negotiables? And how can you communicate those effectively?
Because communication is key. In any relationship,
Dating should be fun.
it should be. It should be exciting.
It shouldn't be a source of stress.
Absolutely not. If it's stressful, something's not right.
Exactly. And most importantly, trust your gut.
Always trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is.
Your feelings are valid,
like that.
and you have the right to make choices that align with your values.
100%.
So we're here to support you, listener, every step of the way.
You got this.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
All right, let's talk. After years of being immersed in discussions about woke culture, I'm curious to hear your perspectives on the concept of toxic masculinity. It's often framed as a leftist ideology promoted by mainstream media and fourth-wave feminists, among others. What do you make of it? To be clear, this thread is likely to venture into semi-political territory, but at its core, this is a topic deeply tied to men's issues and societal expectations. My hope is that we can approach this conversation from a cultural angle rather than turning it into a purely political debate. Let's explore how these ideas impact men, masculinity, and broader social dynamics. What's your take?
Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive on something that's
Oh, yeah.
kind of everywhere you look these days.
Everywhere.
Toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And
Heavy topic.
that is a heavy topic.
Lots to unpack.
There is a lot to unpack, and we actually got a source from you guys this time around.
Oh, excellent.
It's a discussion thread.
cool.
And it starts off with this question, like, basically, what are your thoughts on toxic masculinity?
Mm-hmm.
After, years of this
Oh.
woke crap
Right.
is the actual quote.
Okay.
So it's already
Already.
kind of setting the stage for, like,
Yeah, some strong opinions there.
a little bit of a strong opinion. And they actually call it a leftist ideology.
Oh, wow.
So right away,
Right away.
we're kind of in this, like, a
Yeah.
little bit of a political,
Political realm.
yeah, for sure.
Which, it's fine.
It's out there.
It's out there. We're going to just focus on kind of the cultural aspects of what toxic masculinity is, how it's perceived, how it plays out, all that. Yeah. I think we're going to have to be careful here.
Yeah,
I mean, this is one of those topics that people have a lot of opinions on
for sure.
and a lot of feelings.
Oh, yeah.
So I think our approach has got to be, understanding that there's a lot of different viewpoints out there,
Mm-hmm.
trying to just analyze things,
Exactly.
not getting into political debates.
Yeah, let's just try to understand it.
Exactly.
So if we just start with, like, an actual definition,
Okay.
what are we even talking about when we say toxic masculinity?
I think the most common way to think about it is like harmful behaviors
Oh, yeah.
that are linked to this like traditional idea
Got it.
of what it means to be a man.
Okay.
So things like, being aggressive, being dominant, suppressing your emotions.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I get a little
Tricky.
because is it saying that, like, all masculinity is toxic?
Right. And that's definitely a criticism that people have.
Yeah.
Is that the term itself can feel like it's saying like
Oh, man.
all men are bad.
Which is
That
obviously
being the case.
not the case.
Right. It's not about that.
Yeah.
It's more about recognizing that there are certain aspects of traditional masculinity
Yeah.
that if they're taken to an extreme or if they're not balanced out,
Right.
they can lead to some negative
So
consequences.
it's more about like the effects
Weak effects, yeah.
of certain
Certain
masculine norms.
Exactly. And, just to be clear, this is something that researchers
All right.
have been studying.
Yeah.
There's actual data.
It's not just like
Yeah.
an idea that people are throwing around.
Right, exactly. And like, for example, one of the things that comes up a lot is the pressure on men
Yeah.
to not show their emotions.
To be strong.
To be strong, right. And, studies have shown that this can actually lead to higher rates of depression
Wow.
and anxiety among men.
So it's actually
Like a real thing.
It's hurting men to.
Exactly. And it's not just about mental health. It can also affect relationships. If you can't express your feelings,
Yeah.
it's hard to connect with people
Oh, yeah.
on a deep level.
And you know what I think about this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like anything in life,
Sure.
too much of a good thing can become a bad thing.
Absolutely.
But like I'm thinking about,
Yeah.
the idea of like competition
Yeah.
for men,
Mm-hmm.
like a healthy amount of competition
Sure.
can be motivating.
Right. Can push you to do better.
But if it's like all the time,
All the time.
and it's like cutthroat,
Yeah.
then it can become
Toxic.
toxic.
Right.
And that kind of reminds me of what the
Person in the thread was saying.
the thread starter was saying
It's
about,
woke culture.
yeah, they were
Yeah.
like, this is all just
Years
years of woke crap.
woke crap. Yeah.
How would you respond to that?
Well, I think it's important to remember that the idea that certain masculine traits can be harmful
Okay.
has actually been around for a long time.
Really?
Oh, yeah, way
Longer than the.
woke culture was even a thing.
Wow.
Like, if you think about literature,
Yeah.
classic stories,
Yeah.
you see this all the time.
Okay.
Like Shakespeare's Macbeth, for example.
Okay. Yeah.
He's driven by this ambition
Yeah. To be king.
to be king, right? To prove his manhood.
Right.
And he ends up committing all these horrible acts of violence.
Yeah. He goes a little crazy.
He goes a little crazy, right?
Right.
And that's like a pretty clear example
Wow.
of how these certain masculine ideals, when they're taken to the extreme,
Mm-hmm.
can lead to really destructive behavior.
Yeah.
And you see that theme over and over again in literature and mythology.
That's a good point.
So it's not like this is a brand new idea.
It's not a new idea.
No, it's just that the term toxic masculinity has become more prominent recently.
Right.
Maybe in part because of woke culture.
Okay. So how does that play into all of this then?
Well, I think what's happened is that woke culture
Yeah.
has really put a spotlight on
social justice.
yeah, on social justice and inequality. And within that context, the concept of toxic masculinity has emerged
Okay.
as a way to kind of critique these traditional power structures
Okay.
and how they can harm both men and women.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's become part of this larger conversation.
Right. And the thread starter also called out
Oh, yeah.
like media and fourth wave feminism
Right.
as kind of being behind all of this.
Yeah. I mean, it's true that those forces definitely play a role in shaping our cultural conversations.
For sure.
And, they have their own perspectives and their
Yeah.
own agendas.
Like we all do.
Exactly. And so you'll often see, portrayals of toxic masculinity in movies or TV shows
Yeah.
that are trying to make a point.
Mm-hmm.
And, sometimes those portrayals can be a little bit one-sided
Yeah.
or they can reinforce certain stereotypes. So
Yeah.
it's always good to be critical.
To be critical of what we're seeing.
Yeah, of the messages that we're consuming,
That's a really good point.
regardless of where they're coming from.
Yeah. And the thread was framed as this like,
Men's issue.
yeah, a men's issue.
Which I get.
Like we are talking about masculinity.
Right, exactly.
But like, how does this impact men?
Yeah, that's a really important question because I think sometimes these discussions about toxic masculinity can make it seem like,
Like it's an attack?
yeah, like it's an attack on men or like all
Yeah.
men are the problem.
Right.
And that's not the case at all.
No.
It's actually the opposite.
Okay.
Challenging these harmful norms can be really liberating for men
Okay.
because it gives them permission
Permission
to
from here.
explore a wider range of emotions.
Could be themselves.
To be themselves, right? To connect with other people on a deeper level.
That's really interesting.
And ultimately to just live more authentic lives.
So it can actually be a positive
It can be a really positive thing.
for men. Yeah. Wow. Okay, I see that.
But I do get why some men would feel defensive
Oh, yeah.
or like they're being blamed.
Totally.
It's a tough balance.
Yeah.
Striking.
Like, how do you have this conversation? Woo! without making it like an us versus them thing.
Exactly. And that's why I think it's so important to have these conversations with nuance
Okay.
and with empathy.
Yeah.
It's not about pointing fingers.
No.
It's about creating a space where men and women can talk about these issues openly and honestly.
So, like, if we zoom out a little bit,
Okay.
how do you see toxic masculinity, like, playing out in,
In the culture.
yeah, like in our culture at large?
I mean, I think you see it everywhere.
Okay.
You know, you see it in the way that men are often portrayed
Mm-hmm.
in media.
In movies.
Yeah, in movies and TV shows. You see it in the workplace.
Okay.
You know the pressure on men to be the breadwinner,
So, be the provider.
to be the provider, to climb the corporate ladder.
Right.
You see it in sports.
Oh, yeah?
You know this emphasis on aggression and dominance.
Okay.
And I think you even see it in our personal relationships.
Interesting.
You know, the way that men are sometimes expected to be stoic, to not show emotion,
Yeah.
to be the strong, silent type.
It's like this pressure to conform.
Exactly. And all of these messages, they contribute to this idea of what it means to be a real man.
Right.
And those messages can have some pretty serious consequences.
So it's not just like a harmless thing.
No, it's not.
It actually impacts
It affects our lives
our lives.
in really tangible ways, and it
Yeah.
affects society as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we've been dancing around this whole time.
Yeah.
Is that, like, it's not just a buzzword.
Right.
Like, this
It's
is
a real thing.
a real thing with
That have
real
consequences.
consequences. Yeah. And, you know, even if people debate the term
Yeah.
toxic
I
masculinity,
think it's a loaded term.
it is.
Yeah.
But the underlying issues
Are real.
are real, and they're important
Yeah.
to talk about.
Okay, so I guess to wrap it all up,
Yeah.
you know, we've talked about what it is, how it's perceived,
Mm-hmm.
some of the issues,
Yeah.
but I think the big question that we're left with is like, where do we go from here?
Yeah, where do we go from here?
Right.
Like, is this all on society,
Mm-hmm.
or is it on individual men?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, like how much is shaped by the expectations
Right.
that we place on men versus
Versus
And
their own choices.
the choices that they make.
Yeah.
And that's something I think we all have to grapple with, both
Yeah.
individually and as a society.
And on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive. Yeah, thanks for listening, everybody.
Thanks for joining us.
And keep thinking about these things.
Yeah, keep questioning, keep exploring.
Absolutely.
See you next time.
I've been in a 3-year relationship with a man I deeply love. We've never argued, we're intellectually compatible, and I always enjoy the time we spend together. However, there's one issue that has been bothering me. He's not interested in having sex with me. I always put in effort to please him, but it's never reciprocated. Recently, we had a conversation about the future, and he made it very clear that he will never marry me or live with me. This really breaks my heart and makes me feel like this relationship is at a standstill. I've always believed that in life, if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind. I know that if I were to leave him, we would both be devastated. But if things continue like this, what's the point? I'm truly lost and would appreciate any advice or thoughts you could share.
Okay, so today we're going deep on something a lot of people struggle with, and that's figuring out what to do when your relationship feels like it's just stuck.
Yeah.
And to make it even trickier, we're talking about a long-term relationship like a few years in where there's still love there.
Right.
So before we dive in, I just want to say to the listener who wrote to us, this is a tough spot to be in, and it's totally normal to feel lost and confused.
Absolutely.
So for this deep dive, we're focusing on your story. And, you know, it sounds like you and your partner have some really great things going for you. Being together for 3 years already says a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned you love him. You guys don't fight. You're intellectually compatible and you have fun together. Those are all amazing ingredients for a relationship. But then there's this other side of things
Yeah.
where you're not quite on the same page about physical intimacy and your partner isn't really into the idea of marriage or living together. It's kind of like you hit this wall and we're going to try to help you figure out what to do next.
You know what strikes me right away is that you've been so honest and open about both the good and the not so good. And that takes a lot of courage.
It really does.
And I think it's important to emphasize that your feelings are valid. Whatever you're feeling, whether it's confusion or frustration or even sadness, it's all okay.
Totally.
Relationships are complex, and it's rare that everything's perfect all the time.
And sometimes it's those things that aren't perfect that need our attention the most.
Exactly.
So you mentioned putting in a lot of effort to please your partner. but it doesn't seem like you're getting that same level of effort back. Do you think this dynamic could be part of why you feel stuck?
Absolutely. When you're constantly giving and not receiving that same energy, it can create an imbalance.
Right.
And over time, that can lead to feeling resentful and even unappreciated.
It's like you're speaking different love languages.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
And in your email, you talked about believing in relationships, having forward momentum. You know, that idea of growing and evolving together. But it seems like your partner's stance on marriage or living together kind of contradicts that.
It definitely sounds like you're on different pages in terms of where you see the relationship heading.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to understand why he might be resistant to those commitments. Is it fear of commitment? Has he had a bad experience in the past? Or maybe his vision of a successful relationship just looks different from yours.
All valid points.
Getting to the root of his perspective can help you both communicate more effectively.
It's like you need to figure out the WHY behind the what.
Precisely.
But what if those fears run deeper?
Yeah.
What if it's something like fear of intimacy itself?
Yeah.
How do you even begin to have that conversation?
Approaching sensitive topics like intimacy can be really difficult.
Yeah, for sure.
Starting with something like, I've been feeling a disconnect lately, can open the door for a more vulnerable and honest conversation.
That's a good starting point.
The key is to express your feelings and needs without placing blame.
Right. It's not about attacking. It's about understanding.
Exactly.
You also mentioned the potential devastation you both might feel if the relationship ended. And it makes sense. You've built a life together. But then there's that fear of unhappiness if things stay the same.
You've hit on a really tough dilemma because ending a relationship, even one that isn't fully satisfying, is incredibly painful. But staying in a situation that's not fulfilling can also lead to unhappiness and resentment down the line.
It's like picking between two tough options.
It really is, and there's no easy answer.
This whole idea of a standstill really got me thinking, is it always a bad thing?
That's a great question.
I mean, could it also be an opportunity for reflection and growth? I remember reading about a couple who used a period of stagnation to redefine their relationship goals, and they actually came out stronger on the other side.
You're right, a standstill doesn't have to be the end.
Yeah.
It can be a chance to pause, take a breath, and really assess what you both want for the future.
Maybe it's like hitting the reset button.
I like that analogy.
So what I'm hearing is that while this standstill is definitely a challenge, it's not necessarily a death sentence for the relationship.
Exactly.
When trust shatters, the secret in my wife's messages. I'm in a really tough spot right now and could use some advice or a fresh perspective. My wife has a longtime male friend she stayed close to over the years. Early in our relationship, she mentioned that they had always shared a special connection, but that the timing was never right for them to be together. That comment unsettled me at the time, but I chose to trust her and let it go, not wanting to make things awkward. However, that didn't stop me from feeling uneasy every time I noticed how often they texted each other. I didn't want to come across as insecure or controlling, so I bottled up my concerns and didn't bring them up. Things became more complicated last month when he came to our city. My wife suggested the four of us, her, me, him, and his girlfriend, go out for dinner. I agreed because I wanted to see their dynamic for myself. But the evening was strange and uncomfortable. He barely made an effort to talk to me, and there was an odd, invisible tension in the air. After that night, I felt even more uneasy than before. But what's really been weighing on me happened recently. I'll admit that I crossed a line. I went through my wife's phone. I know it was wrong and I'm not proud of it, but what I found has left me reeling. In a text exchange with him, my wife had written, I told him that if the timing had been right, we'd be together without hesitation. And he responded, "You're right," with a laughing emoji. Seeing those words felt like a punch to the gut. My wife didn't just repeat what I had always tried to dismiss as a throwaway comment from years ago. She doubled down on it and confirmed it to him. I haven't confronted her yet, partly because I don't know how to start that conversation, and partly because I'm afraid of admitting that I looked through her phone. I love my wife, and I don't want to make any rash decisions or blow things out of proportion, but this situation has shaken me deeply. I'm struggling with feelings of betrayal and insecurity, and I don't know how to handle them. Am I overreacting? How should I approach this with her? And how can I process the pain and doubt that have surfaced? I'd really appreciate any advice or insight from those who face similar situations or from anyone who can offer some wisdom. Thank you for listening.
Okay, let's dive into this listener question. This one's dealing with some tricky relationship stuff.
All right, sounds good.
It sounds like, this is something a lot of people out there are dealing with,
Yeah.
these anxieties and stuff around a spouse or partner and, a close friend of the opposite sex.
Yeah, for sure.
A friend of theirs from the opposite sex. And this particular listener is saying, there's been this kind of like underlying what if thing with his wife and her longtime friend.
Okay.
And it sounds like there was even, a while back, a comment from his wife about how like the timing was never right for them.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And you can imagine how that would kind of stick with you.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
And now to make matters worse, he's come across some text messages that have really, amped up those anxiety.
Oh, boy. Yeah, that's a tough spot to be in.
So that's what we're going to unpack here in this deep dive.
Yeah.
And hopefully by the end, our listener will have some more clarity on, how to even approach this.
Absolutely. I mean, these situations are so emotionally charged.
Yeah.
It's really hard to even know where to start sometimes.
Right. And, he mentioned this dinner that he had with his wife, her friend, and the friend's girlfriend. And apparently it was super awkward.
Oh, yeah. I was going to ask about that. So what was it about the dinner that really stood out to him? I mean, was it just a general feeling, or were there specific things that kind of set off alarm bells?
He didn't go into a ton of detail in the question.
Right.
But I think it's important to remember that sometimes, those unspoken dynamics
Yeah.
in a group setting can be really revealing.
Absolutely.
Even if nobody's explicitly saying anything.
Yeah, you pick up on like the body language,
Right.
who's making eye contact with who, just like the overall vibe of the conversation. You can tell when there's tension in the air.
Totally.
Yeah.
Like who's leaning in,
Yeah.
who's kind of mirroring whose body language, all those little subtle cues we might miss
Right.
if we're not paying attention.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's the whole text message thing.
Right. He actually saw the messages. Like he read through them.
Yeah. Yeah, he found them somehow. And, finding something like that
Oh my gosh.
can be such a blow
Oh, absolutely.
to your trust. And it can make all those like what ifs from the past
Mhm.
feel suddenly very present.
Totally. Because it kind of validates those anxieties in a way.
Right.
It's like, oh no, maybe my gut feeling was right all along.
And it's almost like our minds, they start playing tricks on us.
Yeah.
Because there's this psychological phenomenon I was reading about called rosy retrospection. Have you heard of this?
I have. Yeah, that's where we tend to remember past events, especially relationships, more positively than they actually were.
Right. So that almost relationship might suddenly seem, way more significant, way more appealing.
Exactly. Because you're only focusing on the good parts.
Right.
And you're forgetting all the reasons why it didn't work out in the first place.
Exactly. So then how do you combat that? How do you bring yourself back down to earth?
That's a great question. One thing that can be helpful is to actually try and ground yourself in the reality of that past situation. So instead of letting your mind run wild with all the what ifs,
Yeah.
try journaling about what you actually know to be true about that past relationship. Like, what were the real challenges? Were there incompatibilities? And were those issues truly just about timing? Or was there something more fundamental at play?
That's a great idea.
Yeah, just get it all out on paper and you might start to see things a little more clearly.
And it might not be as rosy as you're remembering it.
Exactly.
So, to bring it back to the present,
Mm.
what kind of communication patterns does our listener have with his wife?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Has she generally been open and honest with him? Have they had conversations in the past about,
Boundaries.
friendships,
Yeah.
boundaries,
Yeah.
all that stuff?
Because that's the foundation of any strong relationship, right? Open, honest communication. And if that's already kind of shaky, then navigating a situation like this is going to be so much harder.
Oh, absolutely. So what's the best way for our listener to even approach this?
Okay, so this is where it gets really tricky.
Yeah.
Because you want to express your hurt and concerns to your wife, but you also don't want to come across as accusatory or judgmental. So it's really about focusing on your feelings rather than pointing fingers. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So instead of starting with what is going on with you and this guy,
Right.
maybe try something like, hey, I came across this text exchange and to be honest, it's been really weighing on me.
Okay, so shifting the focus.
Yeah, shifting the focus from blame to the impact that it's having on you.
But what if she gets defensive? or
Yeah.
like tries to downplay the whole thing.
That's where those communication patterns we talked about earlier really come into play. If open communication hasn't been a strong suit in your relationship, this is where things might get tricky. And if she shuts down or dismisses your feelings, that might be a sign that you need to seek outside help, like couples counseling.
Right, because sometimes you need that neutral third party
Yeah.
to help navigate those really tough conversations.
Absolutely.
And remember, feeling betrayed, feeling insecure in this situation, those are completely understandable feelings. You're not alone in feeling this way.
It's totally normal. It's a natural human response to a situation where trust feels compromised. And it's important to acknowledge those feelings and not beat yourself up for having them.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I want to leave our listener with this.
Okay.
Think back to the beginning of your relationship with your wife.
Okay.
What kind of conversations do you wish you had had about boundaries
Yeah.
and friendships? Sometimes reflecting on what we've learned can help us communicate more proactively moving forward.
That's such a good point. Relationships are an ongoing process of growth and communication. And even though the situation feels incredibly difficult right now, it can also be an opportunity to learn, to grow, and to build an even stronger foundation for your future together.
Totally. So listener, hang in there.
Yeah.
You got this.
You do.
We're rooting for you.
Absolutely.
Hi, everyone. I'd really appreciate some feedback on my situation. I'm not leaving my marriage, and the main reason is that I can't leave my children. There are a number of reasons behind this decision, and they aren't going to change. However, I won't be sharing this with my wife. Specifically, I'm not going to tell her that I'm staying just for the sake of the children. I don't think disclosing that would help the situation. I suspect my wife senses that I'm in this position, and I think it has affected her respect for me. There are certain boundaries I struggle to set in the relationship because I can't ever threaten to leave, no matter what happens. It's not an option for me. She likely feels this dynamic on some level, and I suspect it makes me come across as someone without a strong stance. If her respect for me is diminished, it's also affecting the love and affection she shows me. She isn't lying or cheating, but there's a noticeable air of disrespect that lingers between us, and the emotional connection seems to be fading as well. So my question is, has anyone gone through something similar and found a way to overcome it, rebuilding respect and love in the process? If so, what steps did you take? Right now, I'm feeling lost and starting to think that maybe it's just not possible.
Okay, so welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. And today
Yeah.
we're doing something kind of different.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're not looking at a bunch of different articles or news stories or anything. We're actually just diving deep into one single source.
Okay.
And it's really interesting because it's actually an anonymous post online
Interesting.
where somebody is asking for advice
Oh, wow.
about whether or not they should stay in their marriage
Yeah.
for the sake of their children.
Okay.
Even though they don't feel like they're romantically fulfilled anymore.
Oh, wow.
And it's a really fascinating question.
Yeah.
And it gets
That's a tough one.
deep.
It is.
So
Yeah. Let's dive in.
let's dive in. So
Yeah.
what I found really interesting about this post was that, this person is really struggling with this decision.
Mhm.
And it's something that we hear about a lot.
Yeah.
But to see it laid out so clearly,
Right.
just really kind of hit home for me.
Absolutely. And you know what's so fascinating about this is that, like you said, this is something we hear about a lot. It's actually way more prevalent than I think a lot of people realize. There's research that suggests that huge numbers of couples go through these periods where that romantic spark kind of fades away.
Yeah.
But then you add on top of that this whole, question of children and staying together for children. It adds this whole other layer of complexity.
Absolutely. And,
Yeah.
one of the things that this person talks about is feeling trapped.
Yeah.
They feel like they're giving up their own happiness
Right.
for the sake of their family.
Right.
And they're worried about, what's going to happen to their self-respect? What's going to happen to the respect that their spouse has for them?
Yeah.
And, it's such a tough spot to be in.
It is. And this idea of feeling trapped, that's something that comes up all the time in couples therapy. And it's really interesting because when you feel trapped, it often creates like a power dynamic shift in the relationship where one person feels like they have way more to lose by actually leaving,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
And then, Dr. John Gottman, he's like a leading researcher in this field of relationships. And he talks about how this can block what he calls emotional bids, which are those little attempts that we all make to connect with our partners throughout the day.
Right.
And when those bids are consistently rejected or ignored, it can really start to erode the foundation of that relationship.
Yeah, it's like walking on eggshells all the time.
Yeah.
You can't really be yourself.
Right.
You can't express how you're really feeling
Exactly.
because you're so afraid of the consequences.
Yeah.
And the poster even talks about worrying, that their spouse, can kind of sense this resentment and that it leads to
Absolutely.
less affection,
Yeah.
even less respect.
And it's this vicious cycle,
That's a vicious cycle.
It just keeps feeding itself.
Yeah. And that makes me think about this idea of healthy boundaries,
Yes.
because
It's important.
even in a
Yeah.
difficult situation like this, it's still so important to try
Absolutely.
to maintain your sense of self, to set limits
Yeah.
on what you're willing to put up with.
Right. And that's not about being selfish. It's about preserving your own well-being
Right.
so that you can show up as the best version of yourself, not only for yourself, but for your kids too.
Right. And another thing that really struck me about this post was how honest this person is about their own feelings. It's about being lost
Yeah.
and unsure. Rebuilding this love and respect is even possible at this point.
It's a valid fear.
It is, and it feels incredibly raw and vulnerable.
It is, and it speaks to that fear that we all have, of losing ourselves in the different roles that we play in life, whether it's, spouse, parent, employee, whatever it is.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that acknowledging those feelings is actually often the first step towards positive change.
Okay.
So there are couples out there who have gone through similar challenges, and they've managed to come out the other side. Stronger. It takes work, though. It takes really open communication, a willingness to address the underlying issues, and a real commitment to reprioritizing that relationship.
So if somebody's listening to this and they're in a situation like this, what do they do?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the thing is, there's no easy answer. There's no one-size-fits-all. The decision to stay or leave a marriage is deeply personal, and there are no right or wrong choices. But what we can learn from a post like this and from diving deep into it is the importance of understanding all of the dynamics at play,
Right.
recognizing the impact of feeling trapped, the need for healthy boundaries, and that importance of open communication.
Yeah. And what about the kids in all this?
Oh, that's such a great point. Because, a lot of times people will say, well, we need to stay together for the kids. We have to present this united front.
Right.
But the thing is, there's a growing body of research that suggests that kids are actually way more attuned to their parents' emotional well-being than we often realize.
Right.
So while staying together might seem like the most stable option on the surface, it can also expose children to these unhealthy relationship patterns. So I think the key takeaway here is that it's not necessarily about whether you stay or go. It's about the environment that you create for your children.
Okay.
One where respect, communication, emotional honesty are valued and prioritized, regardless of the parent's relationship status.
So maybe instead of just focusing on should I stay or should I go?
Yeah.
The real question is, how can we create a more fulfilling and respectful dynamic, whether we stay or go?
You got it. That's the question right there.
Yep.
That's the question for everyone to ask themselves. What steps can you take to rebuild respect and love in your relationship? Is it even possible to find fulfillment within the existing framework? Or are some more fundamental changes necessary? And I think it's important to remember, too, that there's no shame in seeking help, professional guidance through therapy or couples counseling can be so invaluable in navigating these complex issues.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your insights. You've given our listeners a lot to think about. So till next time, everybody, we'll see you then.
See you later.
I've known my wife for 15 years, and we've been married for 12. In all that time, I've only heard her say, "I'm sorry," 5 times when she's messed up. Out of those 5, 1 was because I explicitly asked her to say it. If I hadn't, it would have been just 4. I'm not asking for constant apologies, but I do want her to acknowledge and own her mistakes. We're human. We all mess up. When I make a mistake, I usually go to her and apologize because it's the right thing to do. I'm frustrated with her inability to take responsibility for her actions. For example, over a month ago, I asked her to stop using her phone after 9 p.m. so we could spend more time together. At first, she made an effort, but over time she slipped back into her old habits. Last night was a breaking point. She stayed in our daughter's room until our daughter fell asleep, from 8:45 p.m. to 10:15 p.m., scrolling on her phone. I eventually had to go in and ask her to come back to our room because I needed to get up early for work. When she finally came, she asked, "Are you mad?" I said, "Yes, I am. You're avoiding me, staying in our daughter's room with your phone, and I had to come get you. We can't keep doing this. You need to stop using your phone after 9 p.m. because you get so absorbed in it that you forget about us." She didn't apologize. She didn't even acknowledge what I said. She just stayed quiet, as if she didn't see anything wrong with her behavior. No, "I'm sorry." No, "I'll do better." Nothing. This is just one example of many. Her lack of empathy and unwillingness to own up to her mistakes is taking a toll on me. I feel devalued, like my feelings don't matter. She doesn't show emotional care, and it hurts. Last night I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about how in 15 years I've only heard her say, "I'm sorry" 5 times. That's not right. Nobody's perfect, and we all make mistakes, but it feels like she doesn't care enough to admit hers. I'm seriously considering throwing in the towel. I don't know what to think or do anymore.
All right, so welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And today we're going to be looking at a single source,
Okay.
and it's pretty powerful stuff.
All right.
These are personal notes written in Vietnamese and dated November 20th, 2024.
Wow. Okay.
And what makes these so interesting is that they're a chronicle of a marriage falling apart.
Oh,
But it's in this, like, really raw and personal way.
yeah.
You get the feeling that the writer never intended anyone else to see these.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's heavy stuff.
Yeah, and, this is the kind of stuff I think a lot of our listeners can relate to.
Mm-hmm.
It's a husband who is feeling unheard and increasingly resentful in his marriage of 12 years.
12 years.
Yeah, and he keeps coming back to this one issue.
What's that?
He says that his wife is just incapable of offering apologies or taking responsibility for her actions.
So he feels like she's not really owning up to her mistakes.
Exactly, and he even puts a number on it.
Oh,
5 apologies in 15 years.
wow. That's pretty striking.
It is. It really is.
Mm-hmm.
Makes you think, is this a personality thing? Is it cultural? Or is there something deeper going on?
It's a really good question. There are a few psychological theories that might be able to shed some light on this. For some people, apologizing can be really tough. Like, it triggers this feeling of vulnerability almost as if they're admitting defeat.
Yeah, I could see that.
It can bring up all these fears of rejection or feelings of inadequacy.
So it's not necessarily that they don't feel bad, but they just can't express it in a way that the other person can understand.
Yeah, exactly. And that can be a huge disconnect in a relationship, especially if one person needs that verbal validation.
And it seems like that need for validation is a big part of what's eating at this husband.
Mm-hmm.
He describes this one incident,
Okay.
and it really stuck with me, too.
Oh.
He says his wife was on her phone while their daughter was trying to go to sleep.
Uh,
And he's not just upset about the bedtime routine. He's
Right.
upset because he feels ignored.
yeah.
It's like he's trying to connect with her, and she's just not there.
And that can be so hurtful. Yeah, I mean, that really speaks to this larger issue a lot of couples are facing today.
What's that?
Balancing technology with quality family time.
Right. It's so easy to get lost in your phone.
Exactly. And these little moments of disconnection can really build up over time and start to eat away at a relationship.
And in this case, it seems like it's really pushing this husband to the edge.
He's talking about feeling resentful, and he's even thinking about divorce.
It's sad.
Yeah, it is. And it really shows how important emotional validation is in a relationship.
So it's not just about saying sorry, but actually making the other person feel heard and understood.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about saying, I see you, I hear you, and what you're going through is important to me.
Now, we've been talking about this from a pretty general perspective.
Yeah.
But we do have to remember, these notes were written in Vietnamese,
Right.
and I don't want to make any sweeping generalizations.
Of course.
But cultural norms surrounding apologies and showing emotions, they can definitely vary from place to place.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In some cultures, direct apologies might not be as common, and people might show their vulnerability in different ways.
So this really complex mix of personalities, relationship dynamics, and cultural influences that are all shaping this man's experience.
Mm-hmm.
And his notes really highlight how important communication
It's
is.
so true.
It's so easy for misunderstandings and unmet needs to just tear people apart.
You know what I think is so fascinating about this is there are no easy answers.
Yeah.
We're left with this very complex look at human interaction and the struggle to balance individual needs with shared responsibility.
It really makes you think, what if you were the marriage counselor working with this couple? What advice would you give them? How would you help them bridge this gap and start to rebuild trust? It's clearly a tough situation,
It is.
but it just shows how much we all crave connection and understanding, even when we're struggling. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
A husband shares about his 20-year marriage filled with love and honesty. Recently, his wife has undergone significant personal growth, becoming more confident and happy. During this journey, she revealed that she is bisexual and has formed close bonds with a new group of friends, many of whom are queer women. Although they both value monogamy and she refused a romantic advance from one of her friends, the husband can't help but worry about the future. He fears that her newfound self-discovery might pull her away from their traditional marital dynamic. He struggles to balance supporting her personal growth with his insecurities about not being able to meet all her emotional and sexual needs. Despite deeply loving and trusting his wife, he feels conflicted about how to maintain the strong connection they built while respecting her journey of self-discovery.
All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going somewhere pretty personal, pretty deep.
Yeah, definitely.
You shared some really powerful, really honest writing with us about a challenge you're facing,
Yeah,
in your marriage.
right.
And, you've been married for 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And we're going to try to unpack it all together here. It's something that so many couples experience, this feeling of uncharted territory
Yeah.
when a relationship, that's gone on for so long starts to evolve.
Yeah, I think that's the real crux of it, isn't it? As individuals grow, relationships transform,
Yeah,
and it can feel like navigating this entirely new landscape together.
exactly. But it sounds like you've built, 20 years, 3 kids, a real commitment to love and honesty.
That's amazing.
That's incredible. You even mentioned how close you two have always been, especially when it comes to intimacy,
Mhm.
physical and emotional. But now with your wife on this incredible journey of self-discovery, things are shifting.
Yeah.
And reading your notes, the word whirlwind really stuck out to me.
Ah, interesting.
Does that resonate? Is that how it feels?
I think whirlwind captures that mix of excitement for your partner's growth, but also those anxieties that come with change. And when it involves something as central as sexuality, it's bound to bring up, like you said, these deep questions, these insecurities, these fears.
Yeah, and it sounds like you are genuinely thrilled for her newfound confidence and self-love.
Of course.
Her new group of friends, especially the women she's connecting with, they seem to be playing a big part in this.
It's true. Social connections can be so validating, offering these new perspectives, this sense of belonging.
Right.
It's like finding a missing piece of yourself, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And amidst this personal growth, your wife has revealed her bisexuality.
Okay.
And you wrote about how you admire her courage and even finding excitement in how this exploration is positively impacting your own intimate life together. But then there's this incident you mentioned, this incident with a friend of hers, making a move.
Right.
Even though she turned it down, that must have been unsettling, right?
I would imagine so. It brings the reality of her bisexuality, closer to home, makes it more real, more tangible.
For sure. And you're incredibly open about this mix of emotions you're feeling.
Yeah.
On one hand, you're excited for her, you're happy for her,
Of course.
but you're also wrestling with insecurities,
Mm-hmm.
fears about not meeting her evolving needs, even the fear of losing her.
It's understandable.
You even mentioned feeling like a stranger in your own home.
Wow.
That's got to be incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin? How can we help you regain that sense of security and connection?
Well, first off, it's crucial to remember these fears are valid. Dr. Esther Perel, she's a renowned relationship therapist, talks about how long-term couples need to rediscover each other throughout their journey together.
Right.
It's not about going back to who you were, but learning to love the person your partner is becoming.
Okay, so how do you even approach that? You mentioned wanting to be supportive but not controlling.
Right.
How do you find that balance?
I think it starts with open and honest dialogue. Really creating a safe space where both of you can express yourselves without judgment.
Okay.
Ask her about her experiences, validate her feelings, and be honest about your own vulnerabilities as well. Not from a place of neediness, but from a genuine desire to understand.
So, like, are there specific questions you can recommend? I mean, something that could help break the ice,
Yeah,
really get that conversation flowing.
absolutely. Instead of asking, what does this mean for us? Which can feel kind of loaded,
Yeah.
Try something like, what are you discovering about yourself that excites you most? Or what are your hopes and fears as you navigate all of this? Focusing on her internal experience can really open up a much more vulnerable dialogue.
That's so insightful. It shifts the focus from the problem, the uncertainty of it all, to this process of discovery.
Exactly. And while celebrating her growth is crucial, it's equally important to address your own needs and anxieties in all of this.
Okay.
Maybe say something like, I'm so happy for you, but I'm also feeling a bit lost. Can we talk about how we can both feel secure and fulfilled in our relationship as things change?
That's a great way to frame it. It's honest, it invites collaboration. It's not about placing blame or shutting down her exploration, but finding a way forward together.
Exactly. And remember, seeking professional guidance can be invaluable. A couples therapist can provide tools and strategies for navigating these complex emotions and fostering really healthy communication.
So to recap, communication is key. But it's not just about talking. It's about creating that safe space for vulnerability and understanding.
Right.
Celebrate each other's growth, acknowledge your own anxieties,
Absolutely.
and seek external support if you need it. You've built a strong foundation over 20 years,
You have.
and you have all the tools to navigate this new chapter.
This experience, while challenging, can actually deepen your bond in ways you might not expect. It's an opportunity for growth, both individually and as a couple.
And as you move forward, here's something to reflect on. How can you use this as an opportunity for personal growth and to further strengthen your relationship? Remember, embracing change and communicating openly, those are essential for any lasting partnership.
Couldn't agree more.
So good luck, and thanks for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And everyone listening, we'll see you on the next deep dive.
See you then.
Bye.
Marriage on the brink. Rekindling love or letting go. 2 months ago, a man's wife of 14 years asked for a separation, leaving him completely shocked. They had not been intimate for a year, mainly due to the side effects of his anxiety medication. While he continued to show affection through small gestures, she felt hurt and rejected due to the lack of physical intimacy. She accused him of emotional abuse, financial control, and making their marriage toxic. She suggested living as friends to co-parent their 2 children with special needs. Over the past 2 months, he has made significant changes, helping more with housework and spending more time with the family, but she has set firm boundaries, avoiding intimacy and showing increasing independence. He doesn't want the marriage to end, but feels conflicted about how to move forward. While he is determined to save the relationship, he struggles with whether his current efforts are sustainable and doubts if co-parenting as friends is a realistic long-term solution.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
I'm ready.
This one's a little bit different. So we're diving into a plea for advice, actually, from a husband looking for some clarity and some guidance as he's going through a pretty difficult situation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So he's been married for 14 years. He has 2 children with special needs.
Okay.
And his wife has asked for a separation, citing emotional abuse and lack of intimacy.
Oh.
So he's trying to figure out, as you can imagine, where things went wrong, what he can do now. And so we're gonna kind of dive into his story and try to offer some advice. Obviously not knowing all the details, but with what he shared with us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, with the information that we have, try to provide some guidance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he mentioned feeling blindsided by his wife's decision. So that's something that really stood out to me. It's like he wasn't really aware that things were this bad. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge that for his wife to take this step, I mean, especially with the added responsibility of children with special needs, it must have been a really, really difficult decision for her.
Yeah, it must have been something that she was thinking about for a long time.
Exactly. And for her to, refuse financial support from him, That really indicates like a strong desire for independence and a clear message that she needs space and time to figure things out.
Yeah, she's drawing a hard line in the sand, it sounds like.
Exactly.
So that's something to be aware of for sure.
Yeah.
Now, he also mentioned that, he thought that he was happy in the marriage and that he thought he was expressing affection in his own way.
Right.
And so I'm curious, like, what do you think about that?
Well, sometimes we're not always fully aware of the impact our actions are having on those around us and those we love, right? And so, it sounds like maybe there is some disconnect in terms of, what he thought he was communicating and what his wife was actually receiving.
Yeah, and he mentioned that his medication was affecting his libido.
Right.
And so he was kind of using that as a reason for why there wasn't as much physical intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think, intimacy goes beyond the physical,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Of course, yeah. Intimacy, it's not just about the physical act.
Right.
It's about emotional connection, feeling desired, feeling seen, feeling heard, and being attentive to your partner's needs, desires, and wants.
Right, feeling like a priority, like you're the most important person in their life.
Exactly. And so it's possible that, those are areas where his wife was feeling a disconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and we've talked about this before on the show, but, for a lot of people, when they think about the term emotional abuse,
Right.
like that brings up images of like, yelling and screaming.
Right, right.
But it can be a lot more subtle in that.
Absolutely. I mean, emotional abuse can often involve these patterns of behavior
Right.
that chip away at a person's self-esteem and sense of security. And so, think constant criticism, right? Dismissiveness, gaslighting, or, isolating someone from their support system.
Right.
I mean, these are all, forms of abuse, and they can be difficult to recognize because it often happens gradually.
Yeah, it's death by a thousand cuts kind of a thing, right?
Exactly. But the cumulative effect can be absolutely devastating.
Yeah, so how can our listeners start to, I guess, understand if his actions, even if they were unintentional,
Mm-hmm.
might have contributed to his wife feeling emotionally abused?
That's such a great question. And I think, a good starting point would be to actively listen to his wife's experiences.
Right.
Right. And really try to understand her perspective.
Right.
Right. Instead of
Right.
getting defensive when she tries to share how she's feeling or share her experience, try to really just listen and understand her perspective.
Right, yeah, just try to be in the moment and really listen.
Exactly. And, imagine stepping into her shoes. Right.
Yeah.
And seeing the world through her eyes.
Yeah, and validating her feelings too, right?
Yeah.
Like saying, I understand why you feel that way.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's so important.
Even if it doesn't make sense to you. Right. I mean, her feelings are valid regardless
Absolutely, yeah.
of whether or not you meant to cause her to feel that way. Her feelings are valid and they matter.
Yeah, feelings are feelings,
Yeah.
and you have to acknowledge them.
Absolutely.
So now, he also mentioned that, they're sharing a bed, but there's no intimacy. They're spending time together as a family, but she set these really firm boundaries.
Right.
So it's kind of a confusing mix of signals, right?
It is. It is. It's a confusing mix of signals, and it's natural to cling to any sign of hope
Yeah, of course.
for reconciliation, right? I mean, anyone would do that.
Especially after 14 years and with kids.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a significant investment in a deep love, right?
Yeah.
But respecting those boundaries is paramount.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, she's made it clear that she needs this space and this time. And so, while it's wonderful that you're spending time together as a family, it's important to respect the boundaries that she's put in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And,
Yeah.
and he did mention that he's a little bit concerned about, making things too easy for her.
Mm-hmm.
Like he doesn't want to fall back into those unhealthy patterns.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
Well, that's a valid concern, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we don't want to enable, unhealthy patterns or behaviors. And so it's important to strike a balance between, showing love and support, but also holding healthy boundaries.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some steps that he can take to start addressing the situation
Mm-hmm.
and, potentially rebuild that trust?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, the first step is to commit to deep, honest self-reflection,
Okay.
right? I mean, really take a look at yourself in the mirror, at your actions, at your behaviors,
Mhm.
and how they've impacted your wife, your children, your marriage.
So how would you recommend doing that? Like what are some concrete steps for self-reflection?
Yeah. I mean, consider journaling, right? Writing down your thoughts, your feelings, maybe even writing about your interactions with your wife, but do so really focusing on her needs,
Mm-hmm.
right? And how your actions may have affected her, even if unintentional.
Right, right. So like trying to see it from her perspective.
Exactly, putting yourself in her shoes. And the second thing I would strongly encourage is to seek professional help.
Yeah.
Individual therapy can be incredibly beneficial in helping you to understand your own behaviors,
Yeah.
developing healthier communication patterns, addressing any underlying issues that might be contributing to the
Yeah.
problems in your relationship.
Yeah. And, sometimes we all have blind spots, right? Like
Yeah.
we don't even see the things that we're doing that are hurtful.
Absolutely. And a therapist can really help you to identify those blind spots and start to make positive changes. And then, of course, if your wife is willing, couples therapy can be a really valuable tool in creating a safe space to address these issues and work towards healing.
Right. So it sounds like it's really important to prioritize, getting professional help, doing that self-reflection,
Absolutely.
and just kind of really taking a hard look at yourself and your role in all of this.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that change takes time
Yes.
and effort.
It's not going to happen overnight.
Exactly. It's a journey.
Right.
And it's important to be patient with yourself, patient with the process, but to stay committed to doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah. And throughout all of this, obviously, the well-being of the children has to be the top priority, right?
Absolutely. I mean, maintaining a stable and loving environment for those kids is crucial, even as you navigate this really challenging period.
Yeah. And it sounds like this is, he's got a long road ahead of him.
He does.
But it sounds like he's asking the right questions. He's willing to do the work.
Yeah.
So, that's a really good sign.
It is. It's a really positive sign that he's reaching out, that he wants to understand. He wants to make things better.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what is one question that you'd like to leave our listener with?
I would ask, what would a healthy and fulfilling relationship look like for both you and your wife, individually and together? Because I think that question can really guide you as you move forward.
Yeah.
Regardless of the outcome.
Right. So even if they decide to stay together or not,
Exactly.
it's about kind of figuring out what that ideal scenario looks like.
Absolutely. What does happiness look like for each of you,
Yeah.
individually and as a couple?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a really insightful conversation, I think. It's a lot to process. But it really comes down to open communication, right? Self-awareness and that genuine commitment to growth.
Yes.
And I think that that's something that we can all benefit from, whether we're going through separation or not. So just remember, change takes time and effort.
It does.
Keep asking those tough questions. Prioritize creating that healthier dynamic, both for yourself and for your family. And until next time, happy diving, everyone.
Happy diving.
I'm 34 years old and my brother is just over a year younger than me. We grew up together in a pretty normal way. I had my own group of friends, he had his, and apart from living in the same house and having the same relatives, we didn't seem to have much in common. When I went off to university, I only saw him rarely over the next 4 years. After graduation, I didn't move back home. Instead, I moved in with my boyfriend, now my husband. By that time, my brother had also left home and was living in a different city. While I still visited my family often, he visited less frequently, and it was rare that our visits coincided. For several years, I hardly saw him, and we only communicated on birthdays or Christmas. Things changed when he experienced a life event and moved back in with our mother. At the time, he was around 28 or 29 years old. Because he was living with Mom, I started seeing him much more often. Even though the age gap between us is small, I felt like I was much older. I was married with kids, and it seemed like I had stepped into proper adulthood while he was still my little brother. The first time I saw him again after such a long gap, I felt like he had changed so much. His appearance, his personality, even the way he spoke and moved. It was almost like meeting a stranger. What surprised me was that no one else in the family seemed to notice or comment on it, but it was so obvious to me. Since then, even though he no longer lives with our mom, our relationship has shifted. We text and call each other more often, and even make plans to meet outside of regular family gatherings. At some point, I don't know exactly when, I started to realize I had feelings for him. At first, I didn't understand what I was feeling. I thought I was just being overly emotional or overthinking things. But things became clearer when he got a girlfriend. I felt this odd mix of protectiveness and jealousy. That's when it hit me. I was attracted to him. My feelings for him were a blend of admiration and desire. I'm not sure what I hope to achieve by sharing this, but I feel incredibly alone with these emotions, and I have no one to talk to about them.
All right, so we're diving deep today, deep into, uh, well, it's a story someone shared
Yeah.
online, right? And it's a lot family stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we got to be, I mean, sensitive, obviously,
Yeah.
but it's wild. Like the kind of stuff you just, you don't see coming.
Intriguing. Well, those personal stories, those are often the ones that really get you thinking.
Yeah.
Those messy real-life situations.
Exactly. And this one's got layers. Okay, so basic setup. Woman, 34, brother's a year younger.
Okay.
Not super close growing up.
Yeah.
Pretty typical, I guess. Went their separate ways, did their own thing. Holidays, birthdays, that kind of contact. Not much else.
Right. I mean, that happens a lot, I think, especially when they're close in age. Sometimes it's like that early dynamic, it just kind of sticks.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So things are like that. Distant, right? Until, and this is where things get interesting, the brother moves back in with their mom. Something happened. We don't know the details, but it kind of shakes things up.
Sometimes that's all it takes, like
Yeah.
you're forced to be around each other and boom, all the old stuff comes up.
Totally. So now, this woman, she's married, got kids, she's going over to her mom's more often, and she starts seeing her brother differently.
Differently how?
Everything. His look, the way he acts, his whole personality. It's like she's actually seeing him, like, for the first time.
And is anyone else in the family picking up on this? Or is it just her?
She doesn't mention anyone else noticing, which is interesting, right? Like, is it her? Her own thing, Or is he actually different?
Well, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? How much of what we see is colored by our own perceptions? Maybe it's a bit of both,
Totally. Anyway, even after the brother moves out, something's changed. They're talking more, texting, making plans that aren't just like family obligations.
So they're building a new dynamic. Interesting. Like you said, sometimes these big life events, even if they're not directly happening to you, they can be a catalyst, right?
Right. Like it makes you reevaluate things.
Right.
And in this case, it leads to, well, she starts having feelings for her brother.
Romantic feelings.
Yeah. Which, obviously throws her for a loop. She tries to brush it off, tell herself it's nothing. But then he gets a girlfriend.
Oh, wow. I bet that complicated things.
Big time. Cue the jealousy,
Yeah.
the protectiveness, even. Like suddenly it's real.
Because she sees him as, like, taken. I wonder if there's an element of, like, that mere exposure thing. The more we're around someone, the more we tend to, I don't know, like them, even if it's subconscious.
Yeah. Like they're spending more time together, rediscovering each other. Plus, now she's the one of the stable life, right?
Yeah.
He's going through all these changes. Makes sense.
Definitely changes the dynamic. Makes you think, right?
Yeah.
Like, how much do we really know the people we think we know? Our own families, even.
Exactly. And she's got no one to talk to about this. It's huge, right? Like, talk about taboo.
And isolating shows you, even families that seem normal on the surface, there's always more going on underneath. Always.
Always. So here we are. She's feeling things she never expected. And it all comes back to how she sees him, right? Her perception.
That's a good point. I mean, what role did he play in all this? We only have her side. What does HE think?
That's the million-dollar question. And the story leaves us hanging. Do the feelings fade? Or is this like a bigger shift? No easy answers, right?
But that's the point, isn't it? To get people thinking, talking about these complex relations.
Yeah.
Families, relationships, it's all fascinating.
Totally. And sometimes it's the stuff we least expect that ends up being the most impactful.
Absolutely.
So there you have it. A story about family, about change, about the unexpected turns life can take. Something to think about.